we started thinking about some unique things about Austin as we were picking this place for our next. Go ahead and just sit in any order, guys. Why Austin is such a place of education innovation and what really makes it there. And we found 3 of our panel speakers here who have all done amazing things, and Austin has influenced their success. And so what we wanted to do is really kind of talk to them. I'll ask each of you to just give kind of a few minutes overview of your projects and what you're doing right now, and then we'll get into and include the audience here with how they can maybe learn from your successes and or any other lessons learned less than success, and also the kind of impact around city, place, and connections that we as a group can take away and model in other places. So I'll come sit with you guys.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, and I should quickly introduce each of you probably. Ron Reed, do you want to go first and sort of talk about?
Susan, so happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I'm Ron Reed. I'm the founder and executive producer for South by Southwest EDU. Longtime Austinite, proud graduate of the Austin Public Schools. Super excited to be in the Austin Library, one of the crown jewels of the city. As you all know, Austin is a big attraction, and certainly a star of the show at South by EDU and all of South by Southwest. So again, really happy to be here.
We are happy to have you. Carol.
Hi, I'm Carol Fletcher. I'm the Deputy Director of the STEM Center at UT Austin, and essentially in that capacity, I basically run teacher professional development programs in math, science, and computer science all over the state, and working on a lot of democratizing computer science education really across the country.
Fantastic. You've got a background too with the school district.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm also a school board member in a suburb here in Austin called Pflugerville ISD. It sounds small, but it's 25,000 students. And I've done that I'm on my 18th year as a school board member in Pflugerville. So.
Great. And Kazique, do you want to
Yes,
give an introduction?
good morning. My name is Kazique Prince. I am one of the senior policy advisors for Mayor Adler here in the city of Austin, and also the education coordinator. This is actually the first year that city office, the mayor's office, actually had someone who's focusing on education in particular, because as you're well aware of, education is the best pathway to deal with some of the inequities that we have in our community. And so I focus on that, but also I'm the project manager for the Mayor's Task Force on Institutional Racism, which partly focuses on education, but also the Spirit of East Austin, which is an initiative where we're facing east, because this is a city that has traditionally neglected aspects of the city, particularly East Austin, or what we call the Eastern Crescent, where many of our low-income brown and black communities reside still, even though we're dealing with gentrification. But that initiative was to basically focus our attention to really deal with some of the needs in our city.
So maybe can you tell us an introduction to what you've got planned coming up and how other people who have cities, government, who are making decisions here what they can learn from you so that they can go back and take, to their cities and say, hey, this is an innovative tact that they're taking in Austin, and these are things that we can help either push or make connections.
Well, one of the great things that I'm reminded by the mayor is that using his office he has 2 powers. He has the power to convene and the power to use his bully pulpit. And in using those 2 powers, he brings attention to the issues that are critical to what he's understanding are critical issues in the community. And so when we talk about job opportunities, when we learn that here in Austin, there are, I believe it's 30,000 jobs that are not filled, they're in the tech community. He uses his bully pulpit to bring attention to those issues. He uses his bully pulpit to talk with educators across the city. We have 7 school districts that touch the city of Austin. So we have Pflugerville that's in Pflugerville, but part of Pflugerville touches, many of the residents live in Austin. You see that in Del Valley and other places around. And so using his mic and his charisma, he really asks people to really, one, pay attention to this, but he convenes people from the tech community. He convenes people from the nonprofit community and philanthropic aspects to really figure out how do we want to bring attention to these issues within education, particularly around STEM and STEAM, because one of the challenges, we have a lot of great people doing great things with good hearts, but sometimes they're not talking with one another. And if they're not talking to one another, oftentimes a lot of resources are wasted, time is wasted. And so he uses those opportunities to bring people together, to bring their great ideas together, so they're working in collaboration to achieve oftentimes common goals.
How about you, Carol? I mean, very similar, I think, but ways.
Right. Yeah, so we have focused a lot on helping folks in the education sector really build capacity. That's a big area of our focus. And what we found is that that particularly in STEM education is a word you hear STEM, everyone knows this acronym. My mom's 88 years old and she has no idea what I do, but she knows I do something with STEM. And so if she sees something in the Dallas Morning News and it's related to STEM, she cuts it out and mails it to me because she knows there's something STEM. But what we have found is that while STEM has garnered a lot of attention, there's an assumption outside the education sector that means that we're actually addressing computer science education in STEM, and what we found is that is not the case. We actually have fewer people taking computer science in high school than there were 15 years ago. We have fewer women graduating with a bachelor's degree in computer science than there were 10 years ago. We are not teaching computer science in schools in Texas, and we're not teaching it anywhere else. And so we've been focusing a lot on really not only increasing capacity and access and success, but most importantly, broadening participation in computing, because we see these fields are really, it's the engine for social mobility. And if we're leaving women out, if we're leaving our students of color out of those opportunities, then we are leaving them out of the track to social mobility in this state and across the country. So that's been a huge focus of ours, is really starting with capacity in schools and districts of teachers. And I loved hearing Roosevelt Weeks. I love the fact that we have a computer scientist leading the Austin Public Library, and his message of seeing how teaching computing to students in the library created that social mobility. And I think also, there's a lot of folks in education, particularly higher ed, where we can live in this little bubble that, we shouldn't be creating cogs for the machine. We shouldn't just be creating people to get a job at Google or Facebook. But to me, it's not about us creating cogs for the machine. It's about us empowering the young people of today. Our greatest natural resource in this state is our students, empowering those people to take advantage of the opportunities that are available to them.
Just to follow on that before I move to Ron, but also what would be like one or two of the most successful kind of shades that you are seeing now in terms of improving those numbers?
Okay, so the reason I got into this is because I have two boys that are now in college, but when they were going into high school, I wanted them to take computer science. I found out we didn't have a whole lot of options in Pflugerville. We had AP Computer Science A at Pflugerville High School. And both my boys are liberal arts majors. I know Serenity now in New York. But I felt like they needed to have a computer science background to be well-rounded citizens. So I started looking around, and I found out actually we were doing better than most schools. We actually had computer science. Most didn't. And so I asked, who's training CS teachers and who's preparing new ones? And I found out the answers were no one and nobody. And then I looked at where are the CS teachers? And you hear a lot about a shortage of math and science teachers. But if you look at this data, this is how many teachers were produced through every single pre-service teacher preparation program in the state of Texas in 2014-15 in computer science compared to math and science. So, and then I interviewed administrators around the Central Texas area and asked, what can we do to help you? Rank order, I gave them like 10 things I could do. If I could find some money, rank order these 10 things and tell me, what you want me to start with. And they said, we need certified teachers. What we found was because there are no CS teachers, there were no students taking CS. Only 3% of high school students, and that's increased a lot recently, take any kind of computer science course. That's out of 16 courses that we have identified that we would call computer science. And that's, once again, the same in almost every state that you guys live in. It's very similar statistics. So we made a concerted effort to focus on identifying not people in undergrad who are computer science majors to turn them into teachers, because the value proposition for that is a huge challenge. You could either graduate from UT with a CS degree and make $80,000 a year, or you could make $40,000 as a classroom teacher. It's a really tough challenge. So we said, we're going to focus on getting those amazing teachers we already have in the classroom that have a math or a science background. We're going to upskill them, give them the content knowledge. They already know how to teach and they're already committed to being teachers. We're going to upskill them, give them the content knowledge they need, and help them become certified. And so in 3 years, we've helped 488 teachers actually achieve a CS certification in this state. And as a result, you can see from the data, we've actually seen a pretty notable increase in not only overall student enrollment in computer science, but also our underrepresented minorities and our economically disadvantaged students. We're actually closing the gap there. But you can also see the data for females. If overall we're increased by 124% and women's enrollment is only increased by 104%, we're actually widening the gap. As a percent, there are fewer women taking CS courses in high school now than there were 5 years ago. And I think Mark mentioned this idea of we assume that because, like that things are just naturally going to get better. And what this data tells us is we have to have an explicit focus on diversity and broadening participation. The reason we increased underrepresented minorities and economically disadvantaged students is we explicitly went to Houston ISD and Dallas ISD and San Antonio ISD, and we're working with Austin ISD and Pflugerville ISD, and we increased teacher representation there, certified teachers. We made a very explicit point to go to places where there are a lot of students of color and students of low income. We haven't been as explicit with females, and as a result, we haven't seen the increase. So that explicit attention is what I would say has to happen in order to make a change.
Fantastic. Okay, Ron, you've got definitely a work of passion that you started here that it now has global influence.
Yeah, and I think, germane to this conversation, I love the perspective, Carol, and the work, Kazique, at the city level. I think at South by EDU, well, maybe first of all, as a brand, we're sort of about innovation and creativity. The event's been around for 30 years in music and tech and film. It's really an inclusive community building experience of trying to find like-minded folks to drive innovative change. And so it was a real pleasure almost 10 years ago now to kind of harness that and focus it on education. I think Austin is a unique city for that, and from the voices on the panel. I mean, clearly South by Southwest is Austin-based. It makes great sense, but Austin is like a big star of the show for South by, and it's really because we don't think of it as much as an event as we think of it as trying to build a community to drive innovation and change. And so what I love about Mark's observations and the conversations here is really this, I think over the years of producing South by EDU, we've seen an interesting evolution in the topics that the community wants to talk about through the crowdsourced program that we do. I think when we first began, it was really about the school day and structures and systems and standards and assessments. I think it focused largely on the school hours. I think today that conversation's a lot richer. It's not only about what happens in the school day, it's what happens in the community. It's the role of education to empower and to support equity and to really illuminate the kind of the employment relevance and cost and value of education for it. So every year we're expecting maybe 8,000 or 9,000 folks, much like you in this room, to come together, to Mark's point, to kind of lean in on best practices, try to assess what's working, what's not, what gets adapted and enhanced to try to make a difference in our representatives or our registrants' communities on it. So again, we feel like Austin is a really special place for that, and that the conversation has become much more about the intersection of culture and learning, and I think that's especially true in STEM. We have a lot of STEM programming proposed by the community for the conference each year. I think, again, we've seen it evolve a lot. It's much more about STEM and inclusion. It's a lot more about STEM and employability, STEM and coding. We see a whole rich array of facets of conversation around STEM, but I think they take on a larger context maybe than the pipeline, and it's more the culture of that and the need and value to surround our learners, whether they're in school or in the library. And I love that we are in this space, because we think in this revisioned world of really the learner at the center, I think the role of libraries become much more important and fundamental than perhaps they have been in the past with the structures of learning. So anyway.
And you uniquely started with an idea of sort of bringing together some people to make, not dissimilar to what let's make some change, let's bring some bright minds together, and then had success. And I think there's many people in this room who are interested in doing that kind of thing in their space. What do you think were keys to success in terms of getting from idea and gathering to impact?
Well, and I appreciate that. And I thought a lot about our shared sensibilities as you were talking about, the challenge and the opportunity. Putting on a small event is as challenging as putting on a large event, I'm just here to say. I think we did a couple things smartly. Well, first of all, we had the benefit of a great brand and a good trajectory, and I'm, respectful. You should, quick aside, the guy that started South by Southwest went to Reagan High School with me over on Berkman Drive. We have been lifelong friends. I had a career in education technology and publishing and sales and marketing while Roland was growing South by. So for like 20 years, we've been saying, is there anything we can do with this brand in education? And so it was really exciting to see it come to pass. But we kind of felt like there was a spirit of discovery and invention and of optimism surrounded with the brand as we see it deployed with music and film and tech. And that was really our aspiration. I spent the majority of my career in K-12, and it felt like the road stopped at graduation, and there was a big chasm between dialogue of student success, as Mark describes, across that broader continuum. So initially it was sort of like, how do you get K-12 and higher ed together? And using the South by model, it was trying to be, by design, inclusive. We want entrepreneurs at the event, so we launch a startup program for early stage ed tech companies. We want students in the conversation, and so we do a number of student competitions as well. We want policy makers to engage. I think a lot of times policy unintentionally limits our options in teaching and learning, and to have them as participants in the conversation. So we partner with the Texas Tribune, and we launch a policy forum in the context. So it was been, I think, sort of an intentional building of intentionally diverse participants, because the broad worldview is kind of the more diverse the community's conversation, the more impactful their outcomes. And so that's the way we continue to look at South by EDU. I have the good fortune of a machine with tremendous scale. The day after South by EDU's 12,000 registrants leave town, 50,000 more arrive for tech, music, and film. So as an entrepreneur, I'm sort of empowered to throw gas on a fire. And so my aspiration is, how do you grow the world's largest learning festival? I think Austin can handle it and supports it and invites it, and so that's what we're kind of trying to do. But I would say trying to build intentionally with diversity. We take a long-term approach to this. We're big fans of the toe dip. Let's try something. Let's figure out if it works. If it does, then how do we light it up? And so that's at least a few of the things that we think about a lot.
Great. I don't know if there was any point you wanted to follow up on that in terms of being the policy advisor in on this, because I think your role here is unique. Yes.
Forgive me if I might, Kazique, to preface this. The mayor's work to address institutional racism in Austin, I loved that Mayor Adler appoints the president of the local HBCU, Houston Tillotson, takes the superintendent of the Austin Public Schools and makes them the chairs of this conversation. And it is the fundamental assurance that education is really the platform for that. And as a brief aside, I'll say that's why 2 weeks of South by begin with education. It's the foundation. So what you and the mayor are doing, huge.
I should mention the HBCU, it's African-American woman. Our superintendent here in Austin is a Latino gentleman. And their leadership has been critical because what that has led to is a conversation about whether it be in education, business, civil and criminal justice, has led to bringing people together to talk about how do we have this conversation around race and racism. Early on in the process, Mayor received criticism from friends and others who were like, well, do we have to call it institutional racism? And said, yes, we do, because if you're going to deal with a problem, you got to call out what you're dealing with. And so it doesn't seem like rocket science, but for a lot of folks, it's like, can we package this in a way that's not so offensive? It's like if you call out race, somehow you makes you a racist, which is kind of counterintuitive. You're just talking about the problem that's in front of you. But I think having their partnership and their leadership to move the task force on institutional racism has been critical and has led to two important pieces. One, we're working with a group called the Pacific Education Group out of Oakland, California, and they're providing a Beyond Diversity training. And we've had nearly 1,000 people go through the training. It's been hugely popular here in the Austin area, but it's, again, to get people to have a common language to talk about race, whether you're in education or other areas. And then it also led to, we had to figure out, working with the consultants can be a little pricey. So we figured out, how do we get people here locally who actually train to provide the resource and have them local so we can cut down on some of the costs. So what that led to is providing actually 60 people here who can actually do the training. The other thing that was happening was really, really great. It was kind of serendipitous. We actually, I don't know if you guys know this, but the global headquarters for design thinking for IBM is right here in Austin. And we were trying to figure out, we have all these recommendations that came out of the Task Force on Institutional Racism. We had 256. But we need to figure out, how do we prioritize that process? Mm-hmm. Well, we worked with IBM and said, hey, can we use your design thinking process to help us prioritize within the different areas? And we took 2 days with over 50 people to figure out how do we prioritize, because what happens with reports? They sit on the shelf, collect dust, nothing happens. So we use that process to, one, prioritize, and then figure out how do we implement each of those recommendations. So we're still in the process, but there is, again, an example of working with the technology field, business community, to help us figure out how do we move things forward on a macro level, but it's really getting people involved with figuring out how do we deal with this issue of institutional racism in a really practical way.
Love it. I'm going to turn this to the crowd in just a minute, but I will do one confession and then have one question. Which is, my confession is, I am a recent person who's moved to Austin and joined this community. And it has been amazing and fun, and even all the pre-work leading up to this is, delightful engagement. And I think one of the things that I'm really appreciating is this sense of openness and connection in this community as a business, as a group that is looking to partner to better education. What would your advice or ask be to Macmillan Learning and or Scientific American in terms of how we can constructively participate in the initiatives here?
Well, I just got here myself 15 years ago. I'm actually a fifth generation Texan. I was talking with Roosevelt. I'm from Houston as well. But I moved here immediately from Atlanta. And so moving from what I call the Chocolate City to Austin, which they call Austin is white Atlanta. Because, you come here and you have this excitement about being in Austin. So one of the things, I'm saying this because as a person of color, it took some adjustment because it was a different environment. It wasn't the clubs I used to go to, some of the restaurants, finding a barber. I literally went to MLK, the Martin Luther King Boulevard, and just drove down the street until I found a black barber. Mm-hmm. That was my way of finding something that I thought, what's the easiest place to find? We go to MLK and find a barber. That's the way to do it.
One in every city.
And so my advice is, if you're trying to be more sensitive to some of the cultural diversity issues, and it takes time. It's not going to be something that you just readily, that's the so-and-so part of town, that's the so-and. It's relationship building over a period of time. And I'll be honest, it was probably 7 years with my ex-wife and my kids before we really got adjusted to Austin. But that patience and that diligence and relationship building, the one good thing about being in Austin is even though we're the 11th largest city in the country, we still treat ourselves like we're a real small town.
Yeah.
And so I say take advantage of that opportunity because, most cities it's 6 degrees of separation. Here it's like 2. So since you know me, now you know the mayor. Good.
I think I'd kind of echo Kazique's remarks, and I think you are approaching Austin the way we think of our event, at least at South by EDU, and that is really about building community. I think that's how you drive change, and again, sort of consistent with the South by experience more broadly is just ensuring a diverse and inclusive environment we think drives great impact. I think, Susan, you're off to a pretty marvelous start in terms of just welcoming community members, aligning your work with the work that's going on here and more broadly. The other thing I'll say, and this is what I love about the summit that you're hosting today, is education is, I think, one of those things that I think a lot about. How do you scale and change the world with? Mm-hmm. But on the same token, there's nothing more hyper-local than my kid and his or her school and teacher. And so I think there is a duality about that is authentic and is honest. And so again, you're helping convene a community to talk about these issues and highlight them. My compliments, and again, my thanks.
Thank you.
And, I'll cede the authority to these two guys much more so than me about how best as a company to interface. But I think, just as a general philosophy, because we do partner with a lot of companies to advance the work that we're doing in STEM education, the partnerships that I find to be the most fruitful are those where quite frankly, the company is interested in transformation over the long run, not simply branding with their own initiative that's narrow in its ability to impact certain schools or students or whatever. So this idea, do we want to truly transform the educational experience for students all across the greater Austin landscape? And if we do, that's going to take a little bit of time. And so, making that kind of investment rather than the kind of helicopter in with some money and an idea that then requires people in education who are already have 18 plates that they're spinning up in the air to kind of decide, okay, which plate do I drop in order to do that thing?
Yeah. So I would love to thank my Austin panel.